Welcome to another Ginger Prince production video. This video is a response to Randomicity912, who has created a video response to my video from a year ago, debunking the Kalam Cosmological Argument as espoused by William Lane Craig. Just to remind people what the Kalam Cosmological Argument is, it says that everything that has a beginning of its existence has a cause of its existence. The universe has a beginning of its existence, therefore the universe has a cause of its existence. And theists will say that that cause is God, therefore God exists. Craig uses this a lot, and I pointed out some of the fallacies involved in the argument in both premise 1 and a little bit about premise 2, but really about premise 1. Randomicity912 has put in a video responding to that, and he says my arguments are as follows. 1. It is fallacious to make a generalized rule based on intuition regarding things beginning to exist. 2. Things don't begin to exist, but rather transform from one configuration of matter to another. Thus, Kalam commits a fallacy of equivocation. That means the meaning of the words begin to exist are debatable. And point 3, the only sense that things begin to exist is when the abstract idea of that thing comes into existence at the time the physical materials that constitute that thing arrange to form that thing. Since abstract objects do not exist independently of physical reality, Kalam fails. He's slightly sort of missing. I could nitpick a couple of those points, point 1 and point 3 particularly, but hey, I just go straight into the main issues I have with his video, and he's put a lot of writing. It's not a video per se, not him talking, he's done it in writing, but I have 12 pretty substantive points to make about the video. I mean, I appreciate the time and effort he's put into it, but in my opinion it's got a lot of holes in it. So first of all, point 1, the largest part of his rebuttal concentrates on things that I don't even mention in the argument. Mine is a philosophical argument, not a scientific one in the main. He states my 3 points and hardly touches on them, building a straw man and dealing predominantly with cosmology, and I'll return to that in a bit. Point 2, making generalized rules based on intuition, and he quotes, denial leads to impossible, absurd results, then they become a matter of logical necessity. I mean, completely incorrect argument. Firstly, he misrepresents my argument. Craig, or proponents of the Kalam Cosmological Argument, make a rule about the universe based on things happening within the universe. However, the things within the universe do not begin to exist. The only thing that does, possibly, is the universe itself. Therefore, you can base no argument on these premises. Basically, he's making what's called an inductive fallacy, trying to dress it up as deduction. Now, this is a huge issue. And then, you know, randomicity, setting out the rule of non-contradiction as he does, is irrelevant here and only offers a false accusation to keep viewers away from the real issues. So his comments about, you know, laws of non-contradiction are just totally out of place here, because I'm making a conclusion that you cannot make a conclusion about the universe based on fallacious conclusions about things within the universe. It's a category error. People that believe the Kalam Cosmological Argument will say everything that begins to exist has a cause. I'm saying that nothing has begun to exist, possibly only the universe began to exist. So therefore the case here becomes the universe began to exist, therefore it had a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore it had a cause. Therefore God. So in fact the argument just becomes completely circular and question begging. And I point this out, the logical problems with this, and randomicity seems to say he can't say this because it's absurd. Well, the point is it is absurd, and that's why you can't use it logically. So I really don't know where he's going with that. However, it gets worse. I mean, his objection to my point 2, that things don't begin to exist, again, his objections seem to be red herrings. He simply does not deal with the issue, but he looks at cause and effect. I am, in a very real sense, denying that there is any effect, i.e. things don't begin to exist. These effects are abstract in nature. Bang on about Hume and Mackey doesn't do anyone any favours. The Mackey quote is actually just a description of inductive reasoning, and the classic Humean problem of induction, using past uniformities to make predictions about the future, i.e. because a ball has always dropped when you release it from your hand, doesn't actually mean that if I drop a ball out of my hands that indubitably it will fall down. You know, just because it's happened all the times before doesn't prove deductively that it will happen. And this is called the problem of induction. I mean, I've written an essay on this, you can check it out on my website. And actually it's funny that randomicity is trying to bring this in to try and debunk my argument, but actually it's completely supports my argument. And I'm not really sure he knows what he's talking about, whether he has a misunderstanding or he's of the quotes, he's misapplying the quotes that he's using. But he's falling into the hole of the problem of induction himself entirely, but just the other way round. He's attempting to conclude deductively about an event in the past, the beginning of the universe, the first event, rather than a future event, say ball dropping, based on the uniformities of the past. So this is a problem of induction entirely, except instead of making a prediction about what will happen in the future, he's making a prediction about what happened in the past. So he's just falling into the problem of induction and trying to make a deductive conclusion, which is, you know, a deductive conclusion is, for example, all writers use pens. Jim is a writer, therefore he uses a pen. It absolutely follows. Premise 1, if premise 1 is true, premise 1 is true, premise 2 is true, premise 3 must be true necessarily. And he's trying to make a deductive claim about the beginning of the universe based on just uniformities of what he sees as happening in the past. I actually deny those uniformities anyway, but even if every effect has a cause, you cannot deductively say the beginning of the universe had a cause. I mean, it's trying to use deductive reasoning on inductively. It just doesn't work. And that brings me to point 4. Randomicity then goes off on one and leaves my argument entirely in dealing with point 2 of my argument. He starts talking about things prior to the Big Bang, which itself doesn't make sense since space-time starts at Big Bang and there's no such coherency in the term before the Big Bang, because time doesn't exist. He says the main problem with this objection is that prior to the Big Bang, not only was there no energy or matter, there was not even any space-time either. What? This is massively fallacious in itself, but fallacious in the fact that it's a complete red herring. It has nothing to do with what I was talking about. I'm talking about whether any item within the universe begins to exist or whether they are transformative changes and abstracts to begin with. I then say you cannot make a rule about the universe based on a fallacious claim about objects within the universe. He then claims my argument is wrong because before the Big Bang there was no matter, energy or space-time. So what? I mean, it's totally irrelevant and a little bit silly, really. So yeah, that's my point 4. My point 5 is he starts talking about minds and what have you. And as for minds, I don't believe if God exists, he even can have a mind, such an anthropomorphic sort of idea. So he's talking about a personal God being a causer of the universe, being a mind. I just don't think God can have a mind. So I think his argument doesn't really get off the ground. I actually believe in naturalistic explanations for the mind. So randomicity is ineffectual on causality from immaterial objects on 2 counts. God doesn't have a mind. And I don't think a mind can, a non-material, a non-naturalistic entity can have a causal relationship with matter or energy. So that's my point 5. Point 6, randomicity starts talking again about causality without actually really dealing with the main thrust of my argument. I actually intuitively believe, like he intuitively believes, that God eternally existed before creating space-time, that matter has eternally existed. It's no more improbable that matter has eternally existed than an eternally existing God, and actually becomes more probable by employing Occam's razor, because you're not multiplying the entities, the explanatory entities within the argument. You're keeping supernatural entities out of it. Much simpler explanation that everything is naturalistic and we've had eternally existing matter in some way or another. Occam's razor would say that's more probable and more plausible than bringing God and the supernatural into the equation. So that is point 6. Point 7. Point 7. Well, randomicity just gets a little bit worse as he goes along. In his assumptions and his claims, he goes off on a side issue trying to deal with dualism and monism, sort of the mind-body problem, which really isn't that relevant to this argument. He claims that the brain-mind equivalence cannot be true, as our brain cells are constantly dying. What? That's not a rebuttal to the monistic arguments. It says nothing about functionalism, emergent properties, anything to do with the mind-body arguments, really, so that's a pretty poor argument in itself. He also mentions qualia. And rather than dealing with this here, I will refer to you to my first book. Sorry, I had to run off and get my my book there. Refer to my first book, which is called Free Will, an investigation into whether we have free will or whether I was always going to write this book. So that's available online, all the normal places. That is a book that deals, obviously, with free will, deals a lot with the mind, deals with the mind-body problem, deals with qualia. So rather than dealing with this here, I'll refer you to that book. I talk about consciousness, obviously, rather a lot, as well as naturalism. For a more devastating critique of dualism and a defence of naturalism, see Richard Carrier's awesome book in defence of metaphysical naturalism, Sense and Goodness Without God. That's a fantastic book. Basically, his little section on this subject is not only irrelevant to the argument, this is randomicity, it's very poor indeed. To use these words, people can regain control and recover from brain damage, even if in only a limited capacity. To kind of disprove monism is just nuts, or to disprove naturalism in accounting for consciousness. I mean, he just has nothing to do with anything and does not refute monism, does not prove that humans are magically more than their parts. Not even a mention of the issues with Mary's room, pain asymbolia, synesthesia, all of which have pretty devastating effects on dualism. So he then tries to rubbish epiphenomenalism without seeing how it is far more explanatorily powerful than his dualistic interactionism. I mean, I'm sorry to bring up loads of terms here, but if he's going to start critiquing philosophical viewpoints, the only way to deal with this is obviously philosophically, and they're quite intricate and potentially dry areas, so all I advise is going away and reading about it. So he obviously believes in interactionism, which is to say that the non-physical mind can interact with the physical universe causally. It makes no philosophical or scientific sense. And again, I refer you to this fantastic book, one of the greatest books ever written. So that will explain all my opinions about this subject. Next is point 8. He tries to look at abstracts and argue that they exist, but in the mind of God. I'm not sure he properly describes the Platonic or Neoplatonic ideals of the classical theists, people like Van Inwagen and Platonists, who would rather be nominalists or conceptualists, i.e. not believing that abstracts exist because it makes more sense, just doesn't unfortunately agree with their classical theism. Craig himself is pretty much a conceptualist these days, but I don't think it helps his Kalam Cosmological Argument cause one iota. The article that Randomicity quotes from is actually pretty problematic. I think Craig makes some basic errors on claiming that abstracts have spatio-temporal properties. The predication of properties, i.e. applying properties to abstracts, like spatio-temporal, they have space and time properties, is itself an abstraction. The term property, and the idea of having a property is an abstract in itself. So you're saying you're trying to anchor abstracts in a concrete way, but you're anchoring it with another abstract. So it's worth looking into the nature of properties before talking about abstract ideas, because I think it leaves us with a kind of circularity or an infinite regression of abstracts. So looking into the nature of abstract ideas before talking about them, and looking into the philosophical area of properties, which is really confusing and very intricate and in-depth. And I think Craig makes a few errors, or at least he has different opinions on how abstracts work, because that fits his worldview. So be it. I don't believe that. I don't think in the same way as Craig, so therefore I end up with a different conclusion. And obviously Randomicity seems to be taking Craig at face value without actually really looking deeply into the axiomatic beliefs that get into there. Because obviously he wants to believe the same thing as Craig. Well, that's fair enough, but please look into the hardcore philosophy about these points. Then the next however many minutes he spends dealing, I think it's 5 minutes, half the video is spent dealing with cosmology and initial singularities, which is not the substantive area of my arguments. I argue one should remain agnostic over cosmology. So I have an essay on my website which details how we should remain agnostic on cosmology, and it's actually aimed at people like Craig, who dogmatically cherry pick cosmology and the bits that they like to fit their arguments. But there's so many theories and so many ideas, and it's in its infancy, and to make a dogmatic conclusion based on cosmology I think is a bit premature. So furthermore, the nub of the argument is that you cannot draw conclusions about cosmological causation based on fallacious internal causations, and the point clearly still stands no matter what Randomicity has said. Point 10 is that even on the cosmology that Randomicity talks about, there are cyclic models that include the Baum-Frampton model, the Steinhardt-Turok model, which Randomicity has not refuted. So he cherry picks a couple of models and pulls them apart, or attempts to pull them apart, but doesn't actually deal with ones that still stand. As mentioned in my essay, and as I said just then, to dogmatically assert these things can or can't happen in cosmology is short-sighted and a little presumptuous, to say the least. I mean, we don't even understand dark energy and dark matter fully, which constitutes rather a large proportion of our universe. So, don't jump the gun. The clever thing to do is to remain agnostic. Only people desperate to force conclusions that they want will employ cosmology in such a way. Multiverse theories, for example, are now orthodoxy. They are scientific orthodoxy, as I read in the New Scientist just recently. And, since all physical theories broke down at the Big Bang, you simply cannot theorize about what happened, because physical theories are just, you can't conclude about what happened then based on what we know from our everyday physics. It's inappropriate. So, to talk about what happened before the Big Bang, I think, is really problematic. Point 11 is it's worth looking into loop quantum gravity and theories of the Big Bounce, whereby new universes bounce before subsequent singularities, and this gets around the problem of singularities that Randomicity seems to want to really talk about. So you have Big Bounce theories where you don't have the problems with the entropy, the problems with the second law of thermodynamics. They're not defied by many of the big bounce theories, which is the major issue randomicity claims. So he's really been, again, dogmatic about his cosmology and not really knowing or looking into or talking about, maybe being disingenuous, I don't know, about all the theories that actually exist. And finally, one of the greatest contradictions of the Kalam cosmological argument for Craig comes in his denial of actual infinities, which he does in many places in his writing and debates. However, in his insistence on a singularity at the Big Bang, he gets himself into trouble, as this requires infinite density of matter, temperature, and curvature. All actual infinities, if you ask me. Total contradiction. So, you know, on the one hand, Craig and randomicity believe in the singularity because it fits in with their nice Kalam cosmological argument. And on the other hand, they deny infinities exist, actual infinities exist, because that fits with other theories they have about their theology. Now, you can't have infinites existing and not existing. That is a contradiction. So Craig is up the shyster here, and I imagine so too is randomicity. And there's one quote that I love. Randomicity quotes Paul Davies. But here's a great quote from Paul Davies himself. It's quite a long quote, so bear with me. The lesson of quantum physics is this: something that just happens need not actually violate the laws of physics. The abrupt and uncaused appearance of something can occur within the scope of scientific law once quantum laws have been taken into account. Nature apparently has a capacity for genuine spontaneity. It is, of course, a big step from the spontaneous and uncaused appearance of a subatomic particle, something that is routinely observed in particle accelerators, to the spontaneous and uncaused appearance of the universe. But the loophole is there. If, as astronomers believe, the primeval universe was compressed into a very small size, then quantum effects must have once been important on a cosmic scale. Even if we don't have a precise idea of exactly what took place at the beginning, we can at least see that the origin of the universe from nothing need not be unlawful or unnatural or unscientific. In short, it need not have been a supernatural event. On a human timescale, the Big Bang was very much a sudden explosive origin of space-time and matter, but look very, very closely at the first tiny fraction of a second and you'll find that there was no precise or sudden beginning at all. So here we have a theory of the origin of the universe that seems to say two contradictory things. First, time did not always exist. Second, there was no first moment of time. Such are the oddities of quantum physics. Even with these further details thrown in, many people feel cheated. They want to ask why these weird things happened, why there is a universe, and why this universe. Perhaps science cannot answer such questions. Science is good at telling us how, but not so good on the why. Maybe there isn't a why. To wonder why is very human, but perhaps there is no answer in human terms to such deep questions of existence. And this is where randomicity, people like him, get into problems, because they want these answers and maybe they don't exist. Anyway, to continue. Or perhaps there is, but we're looking at the problem in the wrong way. Well, I didn't promise to provide the answer to life, the universe, and everything, but I have at least given a plausible answer to the question I started out with. What happened before the Big Bang? The answer is nothing. And that is Paul Davies himself. Pretty much goes against what randomicity was saying, yet randomicity cherry-picked some quotations of Paul Davies. Basically, to conclude, I've given 12 points. I've waffled on a hell of a lot. I do apologise, but Randomicity's video may have seemed very nice on the surface, full of lovely big quotes, but actually it's full of holes, full of issues, full of fallacies. My refutation of the Kalam Cosmological Argument still totally stands. He didn't even come near to refuting any of it, and what he did say was full of problems itself. And I do apologise for going on, but that's that. Thank you and goodbye. In a world of entropy, why can't